Vielen Dank, Clara Mavella, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren. Es ist mir ein Vergnügen, heute kurz zu Ihnen zu sprechen und Ihnen ein Projekt vorzustellen, das an der Schnittfläche zwischen...
A project that is situated at the interface between music and medicine. Ms. Mavella already indicated that a few months ago I switched to the College of Music and have ceased my activities, for the moment at least, at the Charité Hospital. So I'm familiar then with both worlds. We're talking about a global medical orchestra that was, well, it's called the World Doctors Orchestra, that is in a top rank, the Doctors Orchestra that has a number of concerts 2 or 3 times a year. I'll put this up for you on the screen in German and in English. So essentially, we want to combine excellent music with medical responsibility, and that throughout the world. And you might well ask, well, how do you get that sorted out? Well, quite specifically, we support the development of medicine and health policy with a specific focus on developing countries. That applies because we get together and send out signals to others, draw attention to the fact that there are plenty of under-resourced parts of the world. And secondly, when we're in these regions, we've played there, and all our revenues from our concerts have been made available for medical aid projects. Medicine and music, of course, is an interesting combination. You could talk all day about it if you wanted, but I'd like to restrict myself to a few remarks here about the interface between the two. Now, if you like, there are interesting points of contact, interesting similarities between the two. If you take a closer look at things, first of all, they are highly structured systems. Medicine has, since the time of Descartes, regarded itself as being a natural science in the strict sense of the word, and music could well be regarded as a mathematical system, if you're thinking of it in terms of composition, for example. Now, both systems, no matter how structured they might be, taken for themselves as and seen as objective systems, would, however, would be very sober and matter of fact. I mean, you have the relationship between the doctor and his patient. If there's no empathy on his part vis-à-vis the patient, then there'd be something missing. It would make it a bit drab. Well, this may well have an impact on the healing process. This process obviously depends only to a certain extent on the appropriate scientifically founded therapy. It also depends on this somewhat diffuse relationship between doctor and patient. And it's only recently that serious thought has been given to what constitutes a good doctor-patient relationship. What does not form part of that relationship. So this is a very wide-ranging area of activity. And you would imagine there is something ambivalent about it too, because there are subjective elements that come into play. The same applies to music. In the 1970s and 1980s, above all in the United States, certain concerts were reproduced in digital form or in the form on computer. Glenn Gould, for instance, could be resurrected, and this sort of music does not really communicate in the way that a live performance does. After all, that's what we seek if we go to a live concert. And then there are many doctors with musical expertise, and it's an interesting question why that is the case. Of course, there is a boring sociological interpretation along the lines that doctors come from middle-class backgrounds, the sort of background that you learn an instrument in when you grow up as a child, and it may be the case that they stick to music when they move on from adolescence. Now, you could say music, if you like, is an aesthetic compensation for the experience you undergo as a doctor: suffering, illness, disease, death. Doctors are accustomed to being very disciplined in their work, and if you get your specialization as a doctor, you have to undergo anything from 10 to 15 years. But the same applies to musicians as well. Often they begin at a very early age in childhood, and before they get to the top, it takes a long, long time. Now, we doctors have focused on music as one of the main vehicles for the communication of emotion. Music accompanies us throughout our lives, from cradle to grave, as it were. Think of the Kinderlieder and the background music in department stores, which is a good marketing needs. Think of revolutionary songs, national anthems, chants. These are all ways and means of communicating emotion. And ultimately, music is able to reach out to people the world over. It's an amazing form of communication. So much more difficult to do in verbal terms. The orchestra was set up 5 years ago, the Doctors' Orchestra, and announced in a matter-of-fact way in specialist journals. I won't go into details here, but this was a grassroots development, if you like, until the world got around after a couple of years, and a website was set up so that the people throughout the world could register for or sign up for concerts. This may well be of interest to you. This went hand in hand with a self-assessment. We want to know what sort of experience you could gather as an orchestra in the realm of music. In the meantime, the orchestra has 600 doctors from 44 countries on board, many of them with professional training or professional experience as musicians. Many of them are active in professional or amateur orchestras, and in the meantime, the orchestra has taken on quite a considerable dimension. Here are the various countries represented here. Germany, USA, Great Britain, Switzerland are at the top, but then you can see the countries all over the world that are represented. There are a few areas that have not become involved. Same applies to areas of specialization, medical specialization as well. You can see why this is relevant a little later on. What sort of concert projects have we had? Here, a brief rundown of the places where we've appeared so far. And this is an example from Berlin at the Schauspielhaus, where we played in the context of the World Health Summit. That was 2 years ago now. Projects in the pipeline are in Berlin next year, in Vienna and Bonn, and in 2014, Tokyo, Chile, and so on and so forth. I want to go into details excessively here. We adopt a practical approach. Musicians are invited on a long-term basis. They are given the music so they can prepare themselves accordingly. But the benefit to projects that we support here, and we've concentrated here on international projects that have a clear-cut definition, so exactly what it is that we're supporting by music. The Hugo Tempelman Foundation example here, which is active in South Africa and has been playing in a black, is responsible for providing medical care in a township over the past 20 years. And it's not just medical care that's involved as well. There's the preventive and social aspects that are incorporated into this project as well. So that's quite intriguing from our point of view here in Europe. If you have an attempt made to build up an integrated medical system on a local facilities, the Whitman Walker Clinic in Washington, that provides care for non-insured patients. Here in Berlin, as you may well know, there's a treatment center for the victims of torture. They need psychological and social care. This applies to victims of violence from all over the world that we provided support for, and others in India, for instance, the aid organization organized by Dr. Elisabeth Vornstein, devoted to leprosy and malaria, a clinic and support network has been built up there. Hugo Tempelmann Foundation, I mentioned that just a moment ago, is a very interesting foundation. This is a Dutch doctor who went to South Africa 20 years ago, emigrated there, and has provided medical care and support system which is geared very much to the social, political and economic situations in situ. And particularly when it comes to South Africa, infectious diseases, AIDS in particular, are a disastrous problem. And if you just restrict yourself to therapy, then ultimately you're missing the key opportunities to do something against this disaster or bring about a turnaround. So he's very, very consistent in his activities in the realm of prevention. But the same applies to community projects as well, the incorporation or the involvement of those who are affected and their families in community projects. That's a picture of the concert that we gave there. So a model, if you like, for integrated health care. And if you take a closer look, indicated just a moment ago, this is an area which in Germany, many other industrialized countries, does not work properly. We have all sorts of different sectors with inpatient care, outpatient care, rehabilitation, that do not just work in parallel. Well, there's not a great deal of interaction between them. And if anybody's been involved with chronic diseases, either themselves or in their family, then you will know that there is not a great deal of interaction that applies for people who are chronically ill on a long-term basis. In Armenia, we provide support for a center for mentally handicapped children and orphans. It was an integrated care, a concept that was pursued there, social work, ergotherapy, logopedics, and so on and so forth.
Nun haben wir das auch sehr früh auf eine durchaus fachliche, wissenschaftliche Ebene gehoben.
But we put things on a scientific level at a fairly early age because we said we don't just want to deliver money on the spot and hope that is going to make a contribution to resolving the problems on a small scale. No, we deliberately establish systematic connections between members of the orchestra and institutions in the host countries in order to build bridges in the clinical and medical field that would last for a long time. In addition to that, we set up an area that is very important and is gradually beginning to have an effect to the extent that this is involved in the clinical care provided for musicians. Musicians, in the course of their long careers, end up with serious medical problems sooner or later. And astonishingly, there aren't that many training centers that are specialized on the illnesses that afflict them, which is not easy because this is often not attributable to one single cause. There is orthopedic problems with a violinist or other problems with people playing wind instruments. There are psychological aspects that come into play as well. And with the help of this network, we have not only made a start here in Berlin, but also succeeded setting up an international network so that musicians can be told where they can receive competent care and support. Now, you can well imagine there are scientific issues that are involved here. The value of music, the social value of music, that needs to be documented. So the exposure of children and youngsters in kindergarten at school to music or an active involvement with music. So you need to verify the long-term effects that it has. There are various small-scale studies that are focused on the social, intellectual development of children, of youngsters, but the outcome is not very convincing as regards the overall picture. And ultimately, you'd be in a much better position if there were much better, clearly scientifically based study or the findings of the studies that refer to the impact that is generated by the playing of music and involvement in orchestras and so on. And with the help of the international network, we've been able to launch various research projects. You can imagine it's not that easy. After all, this is a relatively new area of activity that we're involved in, so we're pioneers to a certain extent, and we want to get the appropriate funding, third-party external funding, so that we can carry out international projects. We've begun organizing workshops on the spot, not just of medical nature, but also of musical kind. This is a registered society in Germany, Doctors Orchestra. It's now managed by a professional organization. It is a non-profit organization. In the United States, it's also recognized as a not-for-profit corporation on the basis of paragraph 501c. So this has to do also with tax relief. We have a board of trustees, an advisory board that establishes contacts and addresses other issues of the kind that already addressed to. So that was a brief overview of our activities. You've talked about we've heard about various projects in the course of the afternoon. It's difficult to get projects of this kind launched. I think we depend to a large extent, firstly, on people who are prepared to share their ideas with us. I think we had a great deal of good luck and good fortune, and we were able to put together a group of people who were in favor of the idea, who were prepared to invest quite considerably, bore the costs themselves. They take holidays to support these projects and pay their own travel costs, etc. And of course, this moves on from there. They want to achieve a wide-ranging effect, and they've got to address people via the media. They need sponsors, supporters, backers, and that's what we succeeded in doing over the course of years. I think we've now arrived at a point at which we've taken off, we're achieving an impact and are perceived in the public at large. And as regards general medical care and the scientific issues involved, we are able to achieve the relevant additional effects. That was it. Thank you very much.